The courtroom had that specific smell of old files and weak coffee, the kind that settles into government buildings. My father's voice cut through the quiet. "You'll leave with nothing," he yelled, pointing his finger at my mother as if she were a total stranger who had wronged him. Mom's hands were shaking as she held the pen, her signature looking unsteady on the divorce papers. The document seemed to shift slightly in the draft from the air vent. He looked pleased with himself in his pressed gray suit and gold tie clip, which shined under the overhead lights. His lawyer sat next to him, a small smile on his face. Behind them, Chloe, his girlfriend, crossed her legs and leaned in with a sharp, confident smile. And in the back row, my grandmother, my father's mother, sat perfectly straight, wearing her pearls, her eyes looking cold and judgmental. I took off my navy cap, the edge of it brushing my sleeve. The material of my dress uniform felt heavier than it usually did, like I was carrying the weight of every old memory. I stood up and my voice was steady when I spoke. "Your Honor, may I approach?" The judge looked up. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that were sharp but not unkind. She looked at me for a second, then nodded. I walked forward, holding a plain white envelope in my hand. It was sealed and smooth, and inside was everything I had spent the last 2 months working on. When I put it on the judge's bench, it barely made a sound, but it felt loud to me. "This," I said, "might help clear up some of the confusion regarding my father's financial statements." My father made a scoffing sound, leaning back. "Oh, this ought to be good." The judge broke the seal and carefully unfolded the papers inside. The room was silent except for the sound of the paper. Her eyes scanned the page. At first, her face didn't change, but then the corners of her mouth started to lift. She let out a small chuckle. Then she laughed, a real, full laugh that seemed to fill the room like sunlight. "Oh," she said quietly, looking over at my father. "This is good." My father's smile disappeared and his face went pale. The bailiff shifted his weight. Mom looked up, a little bit of hope showing in her tired eyes. The judge cleared her throat and put the papers down. "Counsel will take a 10-minute recess before I make my decision. Please stay nearby." The gavel hit the wood once. My father looked confused and angry, but I could also see he was scared. As the bailiff announced the recess, the sound of chairs scraping filled the room. Chloe whispered something to him, her own perfect smile gone. My grandmother held her purse tighter. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching my father try to guess what was in that envelope. As the courtroom started to empty, I said softly to myself, "You shouldn't have underestimated Mom." 2 months earlier, I never would have thought I'd be standing here, in my uniform, in front of a judge trying to protect my mother from my own father. Back then, Mom was still wearing her wedding ring and made him dinner every night, even when he didn't get home until after midnight. He claimed he was working late, but the receipts I found told a different story. One's for champagne, not coffee, and for hotels, not office buildings. When I came home from deployment last year, I picked up on the small things first. How Mom's laugh had gotten quieter, how unopened bills were stacking up on the counter, and how Dad's voice had become sharp whenever he spoke to her. He used to be my hero. He taught me how to drive, how to parallel park, and how to sand a wooden deck. He had stood proudly in the crowd when I got my commission. But he had changed. His pride had turned into arrogance, and his confidence had turned into cruelty. I'd seen it happen before in officers who forgot what true leadership was. When the divorce started, he treated it like a battle he had to win. He hired the most expensive lawyer in town, moved money around through accounts I didn't even know about, and tried to paint Mom as an irresponsible housewife who had wasted his money. Mom, who had paid every bill, managed every family event, and handled every mortgage renewal, was now sitting across from him in court, looking like she was slowly being erased. The night before the hearing, she said to me quietly, "Maybe I should just sign everything. It would be easier." I looked at her tired eyes and thin hands and the pale line on her finger where her ring used to be. Something inside me hardened. "Mom," I said, "you taught me to fight fairly. This isn't fair. If he wants a fight, we'll give him one, and we'll do it by the book." That's when I started gathering what she thought was lost. Dates, records, and proof. In my world, in the Navy, the truth is always in the logs. And my father had left a longer trail than he thought. I went to the county recorder's office, the credit union, and even the old notary who had stamped his papers. I found a date that didn't match, one that no lawyer could explain away. A signature supposedly notarized on a day Mom was 3 states away, visiting me on my base. I found emails he'd sent to his girlfriend bragging about cleaning out the joint account before the judge locks it. I didn't have to make anything up. I just had to let the truth speak for itself. So I put together the envelope. Every document was certified, every timeline was checked, and every dollar was accounted for. And when the judge laughed today, it wasn't because she thought justice was funny. It was because, for the first time, justice had all the facts. As I stood there in that old courtroom, my reflection barely visible on the judge's nameplate, I realized something. This wasn't about getting even. It was about setting things right. My father's arrogance had been his shield, but the cold, hard, notarized facts were my tool. And for the first time in a long time, I saw my mother take a breath without fear. The gavel struck again, calling everyone back. It was time for the truth to finish what I had started. 2 months before that day in court, I came home to Indiana on a short leave from the Navy. The house I grew up in felt smaller than I remembered, and much quieter. The walls, which used to be covered with family pictures and Mom's watercolor paintings, now had bare spots where frames used to hang. The house smelled like lemon cleaner, and something else I couldn't place: tension. Mom was at the kitchen table sorting through mail that she wasn't really opening. There were piles of envelopes, insurance forms, property tax bills, bank notices, all in neat little stacks. She looked up when I walked in, giving me a thin, polite smile. It was the kind of smile you give a neighbor, not your daughter who you haven't seen in months. "You're early," she said. "Got a few extra days." I put my duffel bag on the floor and gave her a hug. She felt smaller. Her hair, which had been reddish-brown, had more gray in it than I remembered. I asked about Dad. "He's working late," she said quickly, her eyes going back to the envelopes. "Business is busy." I didn't say anything at first. I just sat with her, watching her pretend that everything was okay. But every time the air conditioner turned on, she jumped a little, like she was afraid the door was about to open. That night, Dad finally got home after 9 tuck. He smelled like expensive cologne and bourbon, not like someone who had been at a construction site all day. He walked right past me to the fridge, loosened his tie, and asked, "Did you pay the credit card yet, or am I supposed to do everything myself?" Mom mumbled that she had paid it that morning. He didn't thank her. He just said, "Good," grabbed a beer, and went out to the patio. That's how it began. The coldness, the silence, and the way he controlled everything without ever having to raise his hand. He didn't need to yell. He had already trained her to be on edge before he even spoke. When I was little, Dad used to take me fishing on Sundays. He'd pack sandwiches, hum old country songs, and talk about how life was about earning your own way. I believed him. I joined the Navy because I wanted to live that kind of disciplined life. Work hard, be honest, and treat people right. But the man on that patio wasn't the same one who used to untangle my fishing line and call me kiddo. Somewhere along the way, his pride had turned into a need for control, and that control had turned into cruelty. Over the next few days, I started to see the patterns. Every grocery receipt was filed in a little folder. Dad's handwriting was on sticky notes. Too much spent on produce, no coupons used. The TV remote was kept in a drawer labeled entertainment expenses. Even the thermostat had tape over the buttons with "Do Not Touch" written on it. When Mom tried to buy a birthday gift for my cousin, Dad scolded her for being wasteful. When I mentioned it to her later, she just sighed. "He's just trying to keep us from overspending. Prices are high right now." I held my tongue. I was trained to respect the chain of command, but this wasn't leadership. This was a dictatorship, one built on checking accounts instead of rules. Sunday dinner was the breaking point. Dad invited his mother, Evelyn, and his new business partner, Chloe, over. I'd never met her, but she showed up in heels that were too high for our front steps, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Mom's entire grocery budget for the week. Chloe was all smiles. "I've heard so much about you," she said, holding out her hand to me. "Your father told me what a hero you are." My father's face tightened. "It's our daughter, Chloe." Mom's hands were shaking as she put the roast on the table. Grandma Evelyn sniffed. "Helen, dear, the potatoes are a little dry. Perhaps Chloe could share that recipe she used last month. The one with the cream sauce." Mark couldn't stop talking about it. Mark. Not Dad. Mark. I watched Mom's face as the color drained out of it. Dinner was awful. The small talk felt like little cuts. Chloe laughed too loud at Dad's jokes and leaned in too close when she poured his wine. My grandmother smiled every time, looking proud, as if this was the daughter-in-law she'd always wanted. After dessert, Dad raised his glass. To new beginnings. Mom nodded, forcing a smile. To honesty, she whispered, so softly only I could hear. When they left, she started clearing the dishes without a word. I helped her dry them. After a long silence, she said, "He's talking to a lawyer." My stomach dropped. A divorce lawyer? She nodded. He says I've neglected the marriage. I leaned against the counter. Mom, that's ridiculous. You've kept this house running for years. He says I'll be fine, she said quietly. He said he'll make sure I have enough to get by. That was when I knew he was planning to take everything. The house, the savings, and even her dignity, if she let him. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for legal aid offices in town. Most had long waiting lists, but one, Miles and Hart Elder and Family Law, offered free consultations for low-income spouses. I left the number on a sticky note by the coffee pot. When I woke up the next morning, the note was gone. 2 days later, I found it in the trash. I asked Mom why. She just said, I can't make him angry right now. That line stayed with me. I can't make him angry. People think abuse is always about bruises or shouting, but sometimes it's just about one person making another person smaller and smaller until they feel like they have disappeared. So I started paying attention. I noticed that Dad's work trips lined up perfectly with charges at expensive restaurants and fancy hotels. I noticed he kept a second phone hidden in his truck, and I noticed that the business account had regular withdrawals every Friday, labeled consulting fees. It wasn't just cheating, it was theft. One evening while Dad was in the garage, I asked Mom where the house deed was. She said she didn't know. I checked the home office, the lockbox was gone. That's when I started thinking like an investigator, not just a daughter. I began writing down every date, every transaction, every strange phone call. I called a Navy friend who worked at the county clerk's office to ask, hypothetically, how someone would check for deed transfers. He told me about the online portal for public records. That night, I found something. A transfer request filed in my dad's name, with my mom's signature on it. The problem? She had been visiting me in Virginia that entire week. I sat there staring at the timestamp on the screen. I felt a cold realization. Dad had crossed a legal line. I printed the record, tucked it into my journal, and swore quietly. If he wanted to play dirty, that was fine, but he had forgotten who raised me. Mom had taught me patience, but Dad had taught me discipline. I was about to use both to find the truth. The next week, the house felt different. Maybe it was just me being more aware, but it felt like I could almost hear the lies in the air. Every time Dad's office door closed, I imagined a paper shredder running. Mom still made him breakfast every morning, more out of habit than anything else. I sat at the counter, pretending to drink my coffee, watching him read the paper. He didn't look at her once. When he left for a meeting, she let out a soft sigh, a mix of relief and routine. I said, Mom, where does he keep the bills now? In his desk drawer, she whispered. But don't, honey. It'll just make things worse. Things were already worse. I just wasn't going to let them be permanent. That afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office, a low beige building next to the library. The clerk behind the window, a woman named Marla, looked up from her computer, looking bored. I'm trying to verify a deed transfer, Bus, I said. It should be public record, I think. Address. I gave her our home address. She typed, scrolled, and then handed me a printed sheet. Filed April 12th. Transfer from joint ownership to Mark Foster, individual. Was there a signature for Helen Foster? She pointed at the screen. Yep, looks like both signatures were notarized the same day, April 12th. My throat felt tight. Mom had been on my base in Virginia that week. I had pictures of us at the Navy Museum. I asked, "Can I get a copy of the notary's record?" She smiled faintly. "That's separate. You'll need to request it from the notary directly." She wrote a name on a piece of paper, Brenda Sly, the notary who stamped the document. In the parking lot, I called her. Brenda answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "Yes, I notarized for the Fosters," she said. Both parties came in together. I remember because he made a joke about keeping things official. I sat very still. "You're sure both of them were there?" "Of course." I thanked her, hung up, and just stared at the steering wheel. My pulse was pounding. Either she was lying or Dad had gotten someone else to sign Mom's name. It wasn't just a moral wrong. It was forgery, a felony. That night, I showed Mom the printed record. Her eyes got wide. "That's not my signature. I didn't sign anything on April 12th. "Then we can prove it." She hesitated. "But how?" "Through the notary's own ledger. Every notary has to keep one. It logs the IDs they use to verify signatures and the times. If your name is in there but not your ID number, it's fraud." Mom covered her mouth. "You sound like an investigator." "Just your daughter," I said. "A daughter who reads procedure manuals for fun." The next day, I went to the credit union where Mom had her old account, one Dad had made her close years ago. I asked to speak with the manager, an older woman named Patty, who saw my uniform and immediately softened. "What can I help you with, Lieutenant?" "My mom's going through a divorce. I'm trying to trace some account changes my dad made. He moved money between accounts that used to be joint." Patty nodded. "If your mom gives us written consent, we can provide the records. We can't touch his private accounts, but we can confirm any transfers from hers." Mom signed the consent form that afternoon. The next morning, I picked up the report. It showed 3 months of transfers from their joint savings to a Foster business account, $5,000 every 2 weeks. Mom frowned. "He said that was for property taxes." "Mom, I said gently. "Property taxes don't go to business accounts." She pressed her fingers to her temple. "What is happening to him?" I wanted to say, "He's showing you who he really is," but I didn't. Instead, I called an elder law attorney named Michael Miles, someone a contact from the Navy Family Network had recommended. His voice was steady and practical. "Bring me everything you've found," he said. "Let's see if there's a pattern." The next day, I sat across from him in his small office. I laid out everything, the bank records, the deed copies, screenshots, and dates. He studied each one silently, turning the pages. Finally, he looked up. "Your father is building a narrative of financial incompetence on your mother's part. If he can show she doesn't understand the finances, he can argue for control of the marital estate." Can he actually do that? Only if she doesn't fight it. The good news is you have documentation. The notary record and that date discrepancy, that's powerful. He explained something else. Once a divorce petition is filed, automatic financial restraining orders go into effect. Neither person can move money or change ownership without the court's approval. If he transferred funds after filing, Mr. Miles said, he's in violation. Judges take that very seriously. That word, violation, felt like a breath of fresh air. When I got home, I built a binder, Navy style. I made tababs, labeled accounts, properties, communications, and notary. I wrote a one-page summary for each, listing dates, times, and where the evidence came from. Every paper I touched reminded me of how many times Mom had apologized for things that weren't her fault. For years, she'd said, "I'm sorry, Mark, when dinner wasn't perfect or when he forgot her birthday." She wasn't the one who should have been sorry. The next Saturday, I went to Brenda Sly's notary office. She was closing up when I got there and seemed startled to see me in my uniform. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, "but I need to see your journal entry from April 12th. It's about a notarized property transfer." Her eyes narrowed. "That's confidential." "I understand, but if there's a legal dispute, your ledger could protect you. If you notarize for someone who wasn't actually present, That's forgery. Someone might have used your stamp without your knowledge. Her face went pale. Wait here. She went into a back room and came back with a worn notebook. She flipped through the pages and stopped on April 12th. There it is, Mark Foster. And she squinted. Huh, no ID listed for the wife. That's odd. I took a picture of the page with her permission. She signed a short statement verifying that Mom's ID number was missing from the log. Thank you, I said. As I walked out, the truth felt heavy, but at least it was mine now. When I got home, Mom was at the kitchen sink. I set the photo of the ledger down next to her. She looked at it, then at me. What happens next? We take it to court, I said, and we make sure the judge knows exactly what kind of man Dad has become. Mom wiped her hands on a towel and met my eyes. You're your father's daughter, she said softly. I tensed up until she smiled, only stronger and honest. I smiled back. Then let's make that honesty count. That night, I opened a new envelope. On the front, I wrote one word: truth. The hardest part wasn't finding the evidence, it was pretending I hadn't. My father had always been detail-oriented. He noticed if the salt shaker was in the wrong place or if the mail was 5 minutes late. I knew if he even thought I was digging into his money, he'd move it faster than I could track. So I acted normal. When he came home that week, humming, I greeted him with the same calm voice I used during inspections, measured and polite. He poured himself a whiskey, kissed Mom on the forehead, and turned to me. Your mother tells me you've been helping out with the bills, he said, a hint of teasing in his voice. That's sweet. Just trying to make things easier, I said. He raised his glass. Miss, that's my girl. I wanted to tell him I'd already seen the secret accounts, the transfer logs, and the fake notary stamp, but that wasn't the mission. The mission was to watch him walk straight into the trap he'd set for himself. 2 nights later, while he was out with clients, I opened his home office door. His desk was perfectly neat. But I knew about the small electronic safe hidden behind a bookshelf. I'd seen him open it enough times to know the rhythm of the beeps. 4 digits, a pause, then 2 digits. I tried his wedding anniversary. The safe clicked open. Inside were 3 folders and a flash drive. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves from my bag and took the folders out. The first was labeled Assets. Inside were papers for a lake cabin in Michigan I'd never heard of, bought under a company called Denver LLC. I recognized the names, his and Chloe's. The second folder was Accounts. It listed 4 banks, including one offshore in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't just hiding money from Mom, he was moving it out of the country. The third folder was just 2 sheets of paper. One was a handwritten list of usernames and passwords. The other was a printed email. It read, Mark, I can't wait for next month. Once everything's settled, we can finally live like we planned. I'll start looking at houses in Naples. Love you, C. I closed the folder. Naples, Florida. My father's plan wasn't just divorce, it was a complete escape. Then I picked up the flash drive. It was silver and labeled Client Files. Back in my room, I plugged it into my laptop. I clicked through contracts, transfers, and scans. Then I found one file titled LLC Breakdown DAX LSX. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet mapping every company he'd created to hide money. The totals added up to nearly $1.8 million. He hadn't just cheated on Mom, he'd cheated the whole system. I copied everything onto a clean USB drive, which I labeled Evidence A. Then I put the original flash drive back in the safe and closed it. The next morning, Dad acted like a man who couldn't be touched. He sat at breakfast, sipping coffee. Court's in 2 weeks, he said. My lawyer says we're looking good. Mom tried to smile. That's nice. He looked at me. You'll be there, won't you, to support your old man? I wouldn't miss it, I said. He grinned, completely missing the double meaning. That afternoon, I drove 2 hours to meet Mr. Miles again. He looked through the new binder, his eyes widening at the offshore records. Lieutenant, he said, this isn't just divorce evidence, this is potential criminal fraud. I know. If you bring this up in family court, it could trigger a criminal investigation. Good, I said. He deserves it. He leaned back. You understand the risk. If this goes federal, it'll destroy him. Sir, I said, my family name has already been used to cover up his crimes. I'm just reclaiming it. He nodded slowly. Then we'll prepare. He helped me organize everything into a clean timeline. Financial transfers, hidden assets, notary fraud. When I left his office, he handed me a small envelope. Keep this sealed until court, he said. It's your mother's protection, but it's also your father's mirror. The night before the hearing, it was raining hard. Dad came home late, soaked, but looking smug. Judge Nalani, he said, hanging up his coat. Smart woman. She'll see reason. Reason, I repeated. Is that what you call it? He smirked. Don't start, Navy girl. I know you think you are clever with your rules and ranks, but this isn't your battlefield. I met his eyes. No, I said evenly. It's yours. And that's exactly why you'll lose. He froze, then laughed like I was joking. You always were dramatic. He went upstairs, humming. When his door shut, Mom came out, her face pale. You shouldn't provoke him. Mom, I said. He's not a storm. He's just a man, and his time is up. She didn't fully understand then, but she would. I placed the sealed envelope, the one with every record authenticated, into my briefcase. It was the same envelope that would be on the judge's bench the next morning. For the first time in a long time, I slept well. Not because I wanted revenge, but because justice was finally on the schedule. The courthouse in Marion County looked just like I remembered from school field trips. Old brick, iron railings, and a flag out front. But that morning, the air felt heavy. Mom and I parked at 8:30. She wore a simple, dignified navy blue suit I'd found for her. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her chin up. Mom, that'd be... I said, You don't have to speak today, just breathe. Let the truth do the talking. She nodded. Dad was already there, shaking hands with his attorney, Mr. Reed. He looked great, laughing and patting people on the back like a politician. Chloe stood near him in a white blazer, her smile bright. Grandma Evelyn adjusted her gloves. When Dad saw me in my uniform, his grin widened. Well, Lieutenant Foster reporting for duty, huh? Something like that, I said, walking past him. He chuckled and whispered, You look just like your mother did when she still knew her place. I stopped and turned my head. Funny, I was just thinking you look like a man who's about to lose his. He smirked. Always so dramatic. Occupational hazard, I said, and held the courtroom door open for Mom. Inside, it was cool and quiet. When Judge Alani entered, everyone stood. Case number 23-114, Foster versus Foster, the clerk read. Dad's lawyer, Mr. Reed, started right away. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Mark Foster, has provided records proving Mrs. Foster contributed minimally to the marital estate. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Reed, I've read the motion. Let's get to the evidence. Of course. Dad took the stand. He looked charming and confident. Mr. Reed began. Mr. Foster, did your wife ever contribute to your business financially? Dad folded his hands. No, sir, I paid for everything. The house, the business, her car. She hasn't worked in over a decade. Did she handle any of your accounts? She had access, but frankly, she wasn't interested. I took care of it all. And how would you describe your marriage? Dad sighed, playing to the room. I loved Helen. I tried to provide a good life, but she became complacent, spent too much, and stopped supporting me. Mr. Reed smiled. Your Honor, we request primary ownership of the family home and business assets with a modest alimony package for Mrs. Foster. Modest, Mom muttered. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Mrs. Foster's counsel? Our attorney, Mr. Miles, stood up. His suit was simple, but he seemed calm and solid. Your Honor, he said, we have one item of evidence to submit. It may clarify some inconsistencies in Mr. Foster's account. He nodded at me. I stood up, my heels clicking softly, and walked forward. The white envelope felt heavy. I set it on the judge's bench. Your Honor, I said clearly, please check the date on the notarized transfer, Exhibit 12B. The room went silent. The judge put on her glasses and pulled the document from the envelope. We all just heard paper rustling. Then she frowned. Mr. Reed, she said, this record shows the deed transfer was notarized on April 12th. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Foster, she said, turning to my mother. Where were you on April 12th? Mom sat up straight. In Norfolk, Virginia, visiting my daughter on base. I have flight records and photographs. The judge's gaze sharpened. So you were not present for this notarization? No, ma'am. Mr. Reed cleared his throat. Your Honor, perhaps a clerical error. I don't think so. The judge cut him off. The notary's ledger lists no ID for Mrs. Foster. That's forgery, counsel. You could hear people gasp. Dad's smile was gone. That's ridiculous. It must have been a mistake. Was it also a mistake, Mr. Miles said, stepping forward, that Mr. Foster transferred marital funds into an account under Denver LLC, registered jointly with his girlfriend, Chloe Hayes? Chloe froze. Mr. Miles continued, or that he withdrew over $150,000 after the court's financial restraining order went into effect. Mr. Reed looked lost. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have proof? Yes, Your Honor, Mr. Miles nodded. All notarized, authenticated, and verified by the credit union and the notary public. It's included in that envelope. The judge opened the second stack of papers. Her expression slowly changed. A small smile appeared. Then she chuckled. Oh, she said softly, scanning the pages. This is good. Her laugh filled the room, quiet at first, then warm and disbelieving. She shook her head. This is very good. Dad jumped to his feet. What's going on here? Sit down, Mr. Foster, the judge said sharply. He did. The judge leaned back. It seems, Mr. Foster, that your daughter has done more investigative work than most accountants I've seen. You falsified documents, hid assets, and violated multiple financial orders. Dad's lawyer stammered. We'd like to request a recess. Denied? The judge looked at the bailiff. Notify the Financial Crimes Unit that their documentation will be ready by noon. The color drained from Dad's face. Chloe whispered, Mark, what does that mean? It means, the judge said, that your partner here may also be implicated in these transactions. Grandma Evelyn gasped. This is absurd. My son is a respected businessman. The judge didn't look at her. He's a criminal, ma'am, and criminals lose their credibility in my courtroom. I didn't smile. I just sat beside Mom, my hands folded on the table, feeling her shaking next to me. But for the first time, it wasn't from fear. The judge closed the envelope and nodded at me. Lieutenant Foster, your training served you well. You've saved your mother a lifetime of injustice. I nodded, my throat tight. Just doing what's right, Your Honor. Right, she said, glancing at Dad. That's a word you should get reacquainted with, Mr. Foster. When she struck the gavel, the sound echoed through the room. It wasn't about revenge, it was just justice, delivered in the plain, clear tone of the truth. After the gavel fell, the courtroom seemed to let out a collective breath. People started filing out, whispering. Dad didn't look at me. He seemed unsteady on his feet, as if the floor was suddenly uneven. Chloe kept checking her lipstick, as if fixing it could fix the situation. Grandma Evelyn lifted her chin, her pearls shaking, and followed them out. Mom and I stayed seated. The judge called the lawyers to the bench, then announced we'd return in the afternoon for temporary orders. Mr. Miles leaned toward us. You did beautifully, he murmured to Mom. Now we get practical. We sat in the courthouse cafeteria for lunch. It smelled like burnt coffee and vending machine snacks. Mom stirred her chili but didn't eat. I didn't know the law could feel human, she said. It can, Ustav said, when it's based on the truth. She smiled a little, then looked out the window. Dad was in the courtyard, pacing on his phone, waving his hands. He'll say I ruined him. You didn't ruin him, I said. He did that. We just stopped him from taking you with him. Back in the courtroom, Judge Alani was all business. I am issuing temporary exclusive occupancy of the marital residence to Mrs. Foster, she said, looking right at Mom. Mr. Foster is to vacate the premises within 48 hours with personal effects only. Dad's jaw was tight. Further, the judge continued, temporary spousal support begins immediately. A forensic accountant is ordered. Mr. Foster, the notary ledger, the deed discrepancy, and the transfers after the restraining order. These are violations. You are very close to a contempt finding. Do not test that. When we left the building, it was just a bright, ordinary afternoon. At home, I helped Mom pack a small bag, just in case. Old habits. I made a list. Change online banking passwords, place credit freezes, switch utility accounts, photograph each room for inventory, buy a new lockbox, set up a separate email for legal matters. We worked through the list step by step. Our neighbor, Mr. Larson, a Korean war vet, came by with his lawnmower. Figured your hands are full, he said, and mowed the lawn for us. After he left, we sat on the front steps. Dad started calling around 8 p.m. We let it go to voicemail. He sounded angry, then tried bargaining, then started blaming. This isn't you, Helen, he said in one message. Don't burn it all down. Mom listened to it once, then deleted it. He loved the control, she whispered. He didn't love me. Later, I heard his SUV idling at the curb. He just sat there in the dark. I dialed the non-emergency police number and reported a disturbance. A car cruised by, and by the time it passed, Dad was gone. I didn't sleep much. I didn't feel victorious, just a deep, calm relief. Justice is a quiet thing when it finally arrives. In the morning, we met Mr. Miles to sign papers. On the way home, we stopped at the church. The secretary, an older woman, came around the desk and hugged Mom. You come to choir tonight, she said. We'll put you near the altos. We ate lunch at the diner. Eggs over easy, crispy hash browns. The waitress called everyone Harn. It was also normal. When we got home, the mail was there. An envelope from the court with the signed temporary orders and a handwritten note addressed to me from Evelyn. Please meet me tomorrow afternoon, it read. Just once. Your grandmother. I hadn't called her that in years. Mom read it over my shoulder. You don't owe her anything. I know, I said, but I want to hear what she has to say. That night, I set up credit monitoring on Mom's phone. We put the new lockbox in the hall closet. Before bed, we stood in the doorway of the master bedroom. It looked different without Dad's things in it. I thought I'd die in this house, Mom said quietly. You're seen now, I said. By the court, by me, by yourself. She smiled. Altos, huh? I haven't sung in years. You'll remember, I said. Your voice is still yours. After she went to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my notebook where I'd written truth. I added 2 more words, peace and steady. The reckoning was over. Now the rebuilding could start. I checked the deadbolt. Outside, the flags on our street were still. This is what justice looks like, I thought. Not loud, just firm. I found Evelyn waiting in a corner booth at Miller's Diner, the same place she used to take me for pancakes. She looked smaller, her pearls were gone. Thank you for coming, she said. You wanted to talk. She took a breath. Mark's being indicted, I suppose you know. I do, the investigators called Mom. Evelyn nodded, and they came to my house too. He hid money in my name. Retirement funds, I didn't know. Her voice trembled. At least I tell myself I didn't. She looked up, her eyes the same as I remembered, but softer now. He fooled all of us, she whispered. Not Mom, I said quietly. No, not your mother. The waitress poured us coffee. I came to say I'm sorry, she said. I believed his version of things. I thought she was beneath him. I told myself he was doing what strong men do, taking control. I see now that control is just another word for fear. I let her talk. When you stood up in that courtroom, Evelyn continued, I saw your grandfather in you. He was Navy too. He used to say, wait, courage isn't noise, it's steadiness. You were steady. Mom was too, I said. She just forgot it for a while. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I hope there's room for peace. I'll tell her you said that. No, Evelyn said, sitting up straighter. I'll tell her myself. I'll stop by the house if she'll have me. I finished my coffee and stood up. She'll have you. She believes in second chances. So do you, apparently. I believe in earned ones. That afternoon, Mom was trimming her rose bushes, humming. The same roses she'd almost let die were blooming again. How was your grandmother? She asked. Human, I said. She smiled. That's progress. We sat on the porch. I told her what Evelyn said. Mom listened, then set her glass down. I used to hate her, but hate is heavy. I think I'll let her visit. She's his mother, but she's also just an old woman who built her world on the wrong foundation. Guess that makes us the reconstruction crew, I said. Mom laughed softly. Then we'll build with honesty this time. A mail truck stopped and left a small package. It was an official letter from the Department of the Navy. It was a commendation praising my off-duty assistance in matters of civilian justice and granting me 5 days of leave. I handed it to Mom. Her hands shook, but this time with pride. Your father will see that in the paper. Maybe, I said. But it's not about him anymore. Around sunset, Evelyn's old car pulled into the driveway. She got out, holding a pie. I started to stand up, but Mom touched my arm. I've got this. From the porch, I watched them talk. No tears, no shouting. Just two women facing what was left. Evelyn handed Mom the pie, and for the first time, Mom didn't flinch. The light turned gold across the yard. This wasn't a storybook ending. It was just decency, finding its way back, and that was enough. 3 weeks later, the final hearing was short. The judge signed the decree granting Mom the house. Dad wasn't there. His lawyer came instead. The prosecutor's office had bigger plans for him. As we left, Judge Alani gave me a small nod. Lieutenant, she said, remind your sailors someday that truth is the best defense. Yes, ma'am, I said. Outside, Mom took my hand. You know what your father said when we first got married? He said, you'll never win an argument with me. She smiled. I guess we finally did. I squeezed her hand. No, Mom, we didn't win an argument. We won our lives back. She looked out at the courthouse lawn, and it's funny, she said. I thought I'd be happy, but I'm not happy. I'm lighter. That's enough, I said. That night, I sat at my desk and recorded the last entry in the audio diary I'd been keeping. I spoke softly, but this story isn't story about punishment, I said. It's about boundaries. It's about how truth can sound like laughter in a courtroom when the world has been too heavy. If you're listening, and you've been where my mom was, silenced and afraid, remember this. Silence protects the liar, not the honest. Speak up. There's still good law in this country, and it works when you trust it with the truth. I hit save. Then I went out to the porch where Mom's roses were visible in the porch light and whispered into the night, Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you, Navy. Thank you, truth. The crickets answered back.